You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to today's Training Thursday show. I'm excited to get into today's topic, which is explaining lower back pain. This will also include the hips and lower legs as well. So the reason for today's topic is that there are so many people, we're talking tens of millions of people in the United States alone suffering from lower back pain, stiffness, and occasionally keeping them out from working or just being able to live the life they want. And the problem is this, is that oftentimes it's not as serious of an issue as we think it is. Now, sometimes it is, and I'll give you the reasons for that, but most of the time, it comes with years of, honestly, neglect. And I don't say that because I'm trying to come down on anyone, but the neglect comes from our unnatural lifestyle that we live. And that's what I want to explain on today's podcast, but of course, always give you the action plan to take away in order for you to be able to heal this lower back pain. So the first thing I want to start with is, what are the medical-based conditions that you should know about that can be associated with lower back pain? Now, these are more rare, but it is possible. So let's talk about those first. This you would see your MD about. But afterwards, you'll actually work on your own, doing some corrective exercises or stretches, or working with your local muscular therapist or personal trainer. So let's go through these right now because these do matter. And there's a few things like pelvic inflammatory disease, okay, an infection essentially of the reproductive organs in women, or even prostate inflammation or kidney stones that can begin to cause lower back pain. So you should be aware of this. There are conditions, even constipation. So what happens is your transverse colon actually runs straight across, right above your belly button, right across your spine. And when it's impacted with stool, it can actually cause some lower back pain. So do keep in mind, it can be internal organ-based, and I want you to always keep that in mind. That's a possibility. Now, after that, there are more deeply concerning health-based issues. And so again, it's something to look at, not typical, but a spinal cord abscess, right? So an actual infection in the spinal cord. Rare, but possible, which is why you always want to have it looked at. And if it's simply soft tissue-based, well, we can correct that for sure, right? For sure. Sometimes what we want to look at is during pregnancy in women, even though you think your lower back might start to get a little bit stiff, which again, understandable, meaning that you're carrying another 15 pounds or so in front, you want to understand that it's possible that it could be a complication with the pregnancy. So do see your doctor about this, all right? Another form that's more medical based is a uterine prolapse, okay? This is the ligaments and muscles that hold the uterus in place. They can become weaker. And again, this can be fixed as well, but we do want to make sure that that is not the case. And if it is, we need to work on some uterine prolapse specific exercises to improve that as well. That's really what I wanted to go over in terms of the main medical based. The other one that I want you to understand, and that is why I'm so big on helping people lose weight. I mean, really, it's so important to me, is that take vanity, throw it out the window. There's another million reasons to lose weight, and all of them revolve around your overall health and your longevity. But if you're carrying more weight around your middle, harder to engage those core muscles, that's for sure. It really is. But the second part, not even concerning the visceral fat that we talked about last week, which is, takes a decade off people's lives. But let's take all that, put it out the window for a second. It causes more lower back pain. And that's because, simply put, if you are not engaging your core, you are most likely falling into what's called an anterior pelvic tilt. What does that mean? I want to give you a picture of it. Think of your hips, your pelvis, that bone structure in your hips, as a bucket of water. If you were to take the bucket and tilt it forward away from you, the water would spill out the front. Well, if you look at your hips, the more weight you gain in your stomach, or just the weaker your abs get, so we're going to talk about this, the weaker your core muscles get, technically the transverse abdominis, the more that bucket tilts forward. So what happens when the bucket tilts forward? Well, the lower back muscles begin to contract. What does that mean? Well, they begin to tighten. And as they tighten over time, do you think that may lead to stiffness? Of course, it will lead to more stiffness. So now, over time, it puts more pressure on your spine. So a lot of people talk about herniated discs. And that can happen with sports and with injuries for sure, or bulging disc. But oftentimes, it's neglect. And that's what I want to get into right now. And again, when I say neglect, I'm not judging you or coming down on you. We're all guilty of neglect at some point in our life. It just means that we haven't given that area of our life enough attention. So we are neglecting it. That's all. So once we bring our attention back to it, though, we're no longer neglecting it. We are shifting our attention that way, which is going to allow us to correct the problem. So it's why I tell you that obesity and even being 20 pounds over your ideal weight can start to lead to some lower back pain and stiffness. And I don't want that for you because it affects everything. It affects your mood, affects your energy. Did a whole podcast on how posture is so important for your overall physiology. So you can check that out at stephencabral.com/podcasts. So today, what we need to do is figure out why most people have lower back pain. And that's what I want to go through. The first step I just went through, yes, it can be caused by obesity, but honestly, it's from sitting down in a chair all day. 2 reasons why. Okay, 2 main reasons. I'm just going to talk about these 2 for a second. Is compression of your spine and that anterior pelvic tilt. Okay, so let's go back to the bucket analogy. When you're seated or when you let your stomach just kind of hang forward, for lack of a better phrase, you're allowing the bucket to tilt forward. When you do that, every part of your body has a yin and a yang, an antagonist muscle group to it, right? So what happens? Well, the abdominal muscles stretch. That are on the front. That means on the back, your back muscles have to do what? Tighten, okay? If I flex my bicep, it tightens. Well, the other side of my arm is my triceps. Those have to extend. I can't flex my tricep fully and my bicep at the same time. It doesn't work that way. If I flex my elbow, bringing my hand towards my shoulder, I'm flexing my bicep. That extends my tricep. If I extend my elbow, moving my hand away from my shoulder, extending my arm straight, that stretches my bicep and flexes my tricep, the muscle on the other side. Everything has an antagonist. So a really good muscular therapist, chiropractor, osteopathic doctor, they will know if you have a tight muscle, well, if this muscle is tight, here's the antagonist. That antagonist is oftentimes what we call short and weak. So that means it needs to be strengthened, but also it needs to be elongated. That's where I've gone into exercise in the past, like the Bulgarian split squat or split lunge. Check out that previous podcast a couple weeks back on a Training Thursday. The 2 exercises that most people need to be doing for their legs, right? Gave you that. Bulgarian split squat. Check it out. There's one more in that show. I want you to check it out. So that's a big one. Anterior pelvic tilt. Now, it's possible you have what we call a posterior pelvic tilt. That means instead of having kind of a lordosis, right, that lordotic curve, which is that big arch in the lower back, you might actually have a rounded lower back, right? And with that rounded lower back, which is like kyphotic posture, kyphosis all the way from the shoulders rounded forward to your lower back, well, that can be a posterior pelvic tilt. And that's just as dangerous because your hips and your spine are not in alignment. So with that, it very much tightens your hip flexors, and it can lengthen and weaken your lower back muscles. Okay? So what am I saying here? Well, the first order of business, and believe me, I'm pretty sure there's about 1 billion videos on YouTube. I think they're somewhere around there. And I'll try to find some for you for today's podcast. Let me find out today's show number and link up some videos. Go to stevencabral.com/1252. I'll try to link up a few for you. So the first thing that you need to do is figure out if you're in an anterior pelvic tilt or posterior pelvic tilt. I even did an episode with Dr. Belisa on this, breathing expert, and saying it's so important just to get normal breath into your lungs, which again can cause fatigue if you're not getting in proper breath. So the first thing, I don't want to belabor this, is we need to make sure you're getting into the proper neutral pelvic tilt. So there's no tilt. Your hips are neutral, meaning the bucket of water is not spilling forward or backward. And it should be that way while you're seated as well. I'll break this down a little bit more in a second, but let me now move over to the compression part. Humans were not meant to sit down the majority of the day. So what happens is this. When we are seated, there is compression on your spine. It'd be the equivalent to sitting down while exercising. We call that an open chain exercise. It gets worse if you're pressing overhead while seated. That leads to more compression on your spine. Now, why do we call it open chain? Well, big thing is this. Usually when the body's walking or it's running or sprinting or anything like that, it's closed chain, or we're just picking stuff up doing manual labor. Your feet touch the ground. So it grounds out. So if we're lifting weights, the weight gets transferred from any part of our body through our feet into the ground. We call it grounding out, right? Just like electricity or anything else. The force should go through the ground, and even more important, the force that's being generated back should come through the feet, right? So it's ground force being pushed up through us. Really important because that's what gives us power. Now, let's say your feet are not the ground out point. If you are seated, they're not the ground out point, okay? The ground out point is that first point of contact, which is going to be your hips and lower spine, the coccyx, basically the sacrum and the coccyx, on a bench or a seat, even if you're just seated. Okay, that's your ground out point. So now the weight of your upper body, and if you're pushing down or anything like that, gets pushed through your spine, and your vertebrae become more compressed. Well, over time, that can lead to inflammation, wearing away at the cartilage, wearing away at the discs, disc degeneration, vertebral degeneration, as well as leading to bulging or herniated discs. And again, the herniated disc, you might say, oh, well, it came when I was picking up the newspaper or tying my shoes. Sure, but that's the rain barrel effect. The only reason that happened when you were tying your shoes is because for the past couple of years or decades, it's been tightening up, and your abdominal muscles, core muscles are getting weaker. And you can check out all the muscles of the core on a previous podcast. I talk about the obliques and the transverse abdominis and the quadratus lumborum and, all the muscles. All those matter, right? But that's not for today's podcast. So what I want you to look at is if you're seated for the majority of the day, you need to make sure you're getting up every hour just to take a little walk, okay? 5 minutes. Just get your body up and get a little stretching in there. Start to reach overhead. Do a little sun salutation, right? Get that body moving a little bit. Rotate side to side. You want to get that body moving. Squeeze your glutes when you walk. That will help open up those hip flexors. We'll talk a little bit of that at the end, okay? So, importance. Watch for compression. When you sit for a long time in an airplane, get that body walking for a while after the plane. Get your body moving, whatever way that you can, okay? The next part is this. When you are seated, this matters, or even sleeping with your legs curled up. What's happening is this. Your hamstring muscles, which are the muscles on the back of your thighs, okay? So your hamstrings, there's multiple muscles there, but we refer to them as the bicep femoris or femoris. The bicep femoris are two main muscles. There are more, but when we're looking at them, those muscles can be tightened, constricted. What happens is when you then go to stand, because again, when you keep your ankles pulled in under your hips all day when you're seated, it tightens those hamstring muscles. Why? Because just like your biceps, the way that they are stretched is by extending the knee. So the only way you stretch those muscles is by extending the knee. And then the muscles on top, which are your quadricep muscles, would then contract. So it's really interesting. But the hamstring muscles, for the majority of people, I'm going to go with 99 out of 100, and I think we have good data on that, are tight and weak. So that's why when I gave you the two exercises, the leg exercise that everybody needs to be doing, let's see if I can find that podcast right now, since I mentioned it 3 times. Okay. The episode that I'm talking about, the 2 overlooked leg exercises that time forgot, episode 1203. StephenCabral.com/1203. I just give you the 2 exercises on that page. I show you photos of what they look like, and I would highly recommend keeping them in your exercise program. They're going to be corrective exercises as well. Most people have tight hamstrings, and they're weak. What does it lead to? Well, tight hamstrings do what? They pull on the back of your pelvis, which means what? It throws off your hips and strains your lower back. It doesn't allow for good movement in the hips. When you don't have good movement in the hips, you lack mobility in the hips. When you lack mobility in the hips, it pulls on the lower back, which is supposed to be stable. Quick overview. Ankles are mobile. You can move them all over the place. 360 degrees. Your knees are meant to be stable. They go forward and back. They're a hinge joint. Very little play side to side. Your hips are mobile. Take your leg, you can move it in 360 degrees. For the most part. Your lower back is then stable. Your mid-back is mobile. It can twist side to side. So as you can see, the body is beautifully designed. It has a stable joint, and typically above and below it, it has a mobile joint. Well, if the mobile joint is locked up, it puts stress on the stable joint. And if the stable joint is forced to twist, what happens? We get lower back pain. We get lower back stress. We end up with a herniated or bulging disc. That's how it happens. Honestly and truly, that's what we see all the time. But that's also why we know how to correct it. I'm going to get to that in 2 minutes. The last part I want to give you are 2 more today. Okay, so the second and last one is this. Besides your hamstrings being tight and weak, it's the hip flexors. The hip flexors are the muscle now right below your hip bone. It's actually right to the inside, okay? So it's right where we call the groin area, that inguinal cleft, that little line going down right at the top of your leg. That's where the psoas muscle is, okay? There's actually 2 parts to your psoas, but it starts in the front of the body, and it actually connects up to your spine. A lot of people don't know that. But your psoas muscle connects to the thoracic and lumbar part of the spine. And there's actually a little bit of give and play per individual, believe it or not. And that's why it's kind of interesting to look at the human body. It's pretty much set, but there are just slight variations. Dr. Roger Williams also showed this as well. Slight variations to what the liver looks like, what the shape of the kidneys look like. Slight variations, but never massive. So we always know what we need to do for each individual person. So that's why in that episode 1203, was it? Yes, 1203, I gave you the other exercise to correct the tight psoas. Why would the psoas be tight? Think about it. The only way that you stretch your psoas is doing a stretch like the warrior pose from yoga or a lunge. Because what has to happen is you have to contract your glutes in order to stretch the psoas. But as we get older, we forget to squeeze our glutes as we walk. We forget to squeeze them and extend when we run or do anything. So that's why these psoas muscles are also weak and tight. The biggest part is because we seated so much of the day, right? Think about it. I mean, how many hours a day are really seated? Most people, 12 minimum. 14, 16 hours. I mean, like, the only time you're not seated is when you're up and walking around. For most people, that's less than 90 minutes. Because if it was more than 90 minutes, you'd hit your 10,000 steps a day. So it's a scary proposition when you look at it that way. But the psoas muscle is in a shortened position when you're seated. And especially when you're seated and leaning over your desk. So now we have tight hamstrings and we have tight psoas muscles. So it's pulling on our spine and our hips. This leads to countless cases of lower back pain. And it never gets better. It never gets better unless you begin to stretch and strengthen the psoas, stretch and strengthen the hamstrings. So I'm going to get to that in 1 second. The last part is this. Because there are so many people wearing improper shoe wear, not doing enough barefoot walking or training, the muscles of the feet get weak, the feet pronate and collapse in, and also women and men wearing a heel. So let's say that you're wearing a 2-inch heel. Well, it's going to be much more dramatic. But even like if you look at, let's say, a pair of dress shoes, might be a 1-inch heel. What's that doing? Well, it's leaving your Achilles tendon and your calves in a shortened position. And it's most likely leading to what we call less plantar and dorsiflexion of the ankle. What does that mean? It means less ability to pump up and down with the foot. So if you don't do that, you get less actual work with the muscles of the lower leg and more impact through the knees and lower back when you walk. You're basically walking almost flat-footed. There's no cushioning. There's no absorption. So that's why barefoot training. I've done a podcast on this as well. I don't think it's a smart idea to run barefoot on concrete. I don't. Humans weren't meant to run barefoot on concrete. But you could walk around in the grass. You could walk around your house barefoot. You could begin to do some barefoot training like one-legged squats or your exercises barefoot, working to make sure that you keep a good arch in your foot. Now, do work out in a safe environment. It can just be body weight, but you should help to strengthen those muscles and work on ankle mobility. Again, that gets tight through improper use and then also just the footwear that we wear. So that's why when I go to exercise, I use a minimalist shoe or a barefoot. And if I do deadlifts, I do anything like that, I keep my shoes pre-tied basically. I don't tie my shoes, my sneakers every time. And even my shoes are slip-ons. I can't tell you the last time I really tie my shoe unless it comes undone. And that's because I just kick off my shoes when I go to do a leg exercise or any standing exercise for the most part. And then I slip them back on when I'm at the gym. And if I'm home working out or if I'm in Maine working out barefoot in the backyard, it's barefoot. That's it. It's the best. It's great to do. I try to walk around barefoot as much as possible. Okay, so that's the first corrective exercise for those ankles. Hamstrings. You probably heard of hamstring stretches before. We need to do those hamstrings, but we also, hamstring stretches, but we need to also lengthen them. You can't just stretch through adhesions. You need to work on the fascia. So you want to do things like foam rolling. And again, I've done many podcasts on foam rolling. I would love you to look up those previous podcasts at stephencabral.com/podcasts. And you can always ask for those podcasts inside of cabralsupportgroup.com. It's our free Facebook group that we offer free health coaching in. That will allow you to work on lengthening the fascia, the covering essentially of your muscles. And the same with the psoas. You can foam roll your psoas and you can stretch those psoas muscles, but you also need to strengthen them. Okay, that's a big part of it. Next, work on opening up your hips. Do some hip foam rolling with a myo ball, a foam roll ball. You can do exercises like hydrants and rotations and cars and things like that. You could do all of those, and they're all fantastic. But you want to work on that hip mobility because remember, if your hips aren't mobile, you're going to have a stiff lower back. There's no way the other way around it. If your hips are immobile, if your hips are stiff, you will have a tight lower back, and you will most likely injure your lower back. It's only a matter of time. Okay, really important. Then for your mid-back, you can use a foam rolling device. 2 tennis balls put together or the plexus wheel that I just mentioned 2 Fridays ago. Let me see the podcast on that. 1, 2, 3, 9 with the plexus wheel. So even if you don't go with their wheel, the chirp wheel comes in 3 sizes. If you don't go with the 3-pack, start with the middle size one. But you can also use the double ball they have on their website. I used to make them with 2 tennis balls taped together with friction tape. That they now make it easier, right? So you can just roll that along a wall with your mid-back to upper back. Feels phenomenal. And then eventually you'll get on the floor doing it. And it's unbelievable. I don't play a lot of golf anymore. But when I do, it's even more important that I open up that mid-back so I don't hurt my lower back. I've worked with a lot of golfers in my time. I've worked with PGA golfers, professional golfers, and I help them increase mobility through their hips and their mid-back, and they add yards to their drive. They add touch to their short game. And the reason they do that isn't because I necessarily even made them any stronger. We'll do Olympic lifts, we'll do all sorts of things, but what I did was allow them better ease of swing. So the stroke is that much more fluid, and there's no pulling on their lower back. It doesn't throw them off. They can make a really nice circle, right? So that's what we help them with. Now, I want to give you one more. So I've talked about it before. You can use a standing desk. Now, you can just go to StephenCabral.com/podcast, literally just type in standing desk. You can get something that allows you to just keep your current desk and put a little crank system essentially that holds up your laptop or computer or monitor, right? That's nice to do. You have to do it for the full day. I warn you about this just that you don't lock out your knees and sway your lower back. So many people do that. So that's why it's not always my favorite. I feel like blood pools in the legs too much. What you can also do, though, is get a stability ball. If you're between 5'6" and 5'10", the 65 centimeter is a great size. If you're above 6 feet, 5'11", 6 feet, 75 centimeter can be a good size. If you're below 5'6", 55 centimeters is a good size. You can blow it up, increase it if you need to, or deflate it a little bit, and it'll be perfect. Most people can then get their legs at about a right angle. Now, sitting on a stability ball, you're still seated. However, it's going to force you to engage your core and abs to a greater degree, and that's highly beneficial. So my last point is this. You also want to strengthen your core. Whether you just need to lose the weight, whether you need to get up more, whatever it is, strengthen your core. You should be doing exercises like the plank, the V pose or boat pose, and fundamental bodyweight exercises like squats, lunges, step-ups, deadlifts that get your body moving in unison as a whole body unit. And then do the planks, the chops, and the V poses for your core. All of these topics have been covered in depth before on the Cabral Concept on Training Thursday shows. Go back to StephenCabral.com/podcast and you'll be able to find all those previous podcasts on how to do all of these exercises and much more. I hope today's podcast really demystified lower back pain for the majority of people. This is what they're suffering from. And it will allow you to either seek out the great personal trainer, muscular therapist, etc., or watch the videos, begin to implement, and really take control of your own health. That's what it's all about. That's what we talked about yesterday's podcast. How to take control of your own health. You can do it. It really is up to you. Nobody else is going to do it. So that's why I really appreciate you tuning in each and every day to the Cabral Concept, because we try to build off of these principles. So as I always say, if this podcast was helpful, please do feel free to help me spread the mission and pass this show along to anyone else you believe it could serve. Ever wonder what the best sauna, blue blockers, sleep trackers, wake lights, salt lamps, or other health gadgets are? Or what about the top non-toxic mattresses, sheets, soaps, bath products, toothpaste, and cookware? Or would you like to know the cleanest choices for hemp parts, meal delivery services, supplements, and much more? I personally curated, researched, and now created a resource page of all of my top picks that continues to grow each week. These are the exact products I use in my own life, with my family, in my private practice, and they're the ones I trust. To find out all of my up-to-date recommendations and all the details, simply head on over to StephenCabral.com/resources.